Dear colleagues, today we'd like to present to you our report on transformation of teacher education in Russia. The current system of teacher education in Russia looks like a very complex multi-level system of continuing teacher education offering various forms of education and types of educational organizations. Education reformation represents a serious challenge and an important priority for many countries today. Our life today and our future prospects are becoming more vague and undecided as rapid changes and innovations are taking place inside the professional fields. New sectors of economy and social life are emerging while communication processes are transforming and speeding up between individuals and whole organizations. This involves a drastic shift in the general educational mission. We are moving away from transmitting knowledge towards the industry of opportunities, which calls for lifelong learning based on flexible and adaptable thinking. It is noteworthy that the most developed countries view teacher education as a priority within their national education policies, and universities are mostly authorized by governments to structure and organize teacher education programs. Thus, there is an international agreement that teacher education has an important value in society in relation to political, social and educational aspects of life. In addition, it is clear that there is a need for consistent efforts aimed at teacher education reformation under the current conditions of inevitably changing educational demands. Consequently, over the past 2 decades, teacher education reforms have been taking place all over the world, varying in scale. These processes have been documented and analyzed by many distinguished scholars, both in Russia and abroad. Russia is not an exception here. Teacher education has been traditionally viewed as one of the most important elements of national policy. It is worth taking a look back at the end of the 18th century, when teacher education first became a separate domain, as the Moscow State University in 1779 established the first teacher gymnasium, which trained teachers for city schools and colleges. In 1804, the teacher gymnasium was transformed into the Pedagogical Institute. Then, in 1812, another pedagogical institute was opened within the structure of Kazan Federal University, becoming the only educational center preparing teachers for Siberia, Central Asia and the Volga region for a long time. On the second half of the 19th century, the number of specialized teacher education institutions was steadily growing. Over the course of more than 2 centuries, Russian teacher education underwent numerous transformations that were especially active when major socio-economic changes were taking place. Notable among them are the most recent 3 decades, as they significantly shaped how the system of teacher education looks today. Some changes had effects that were to some extent indirect and delayed, which preserved the main traits of Soviet education system up until the first decade of the 21st century. Indeed, up to 2010, the Russian teacher education was significantly influenced by the Soviet traditions. The contents of teacher education stayed the same, which was mostly determined by the state educational standards first introduced in 1992. These standards were replaced with the federal state educational standards in 2010. Problematic issues related to organization and content within teacher education in Russia became obvious in the beginning of this decade, which pushed the government to reform teacher education in the country. The following problems were identified as the most important. Firstly, mismatch between the requirements of the professional standards and the work performed by the majority of teachers who do not have enough knowledge and qualification to be teachers. Secondly, gap between the content, technologies and educational outcomes of the main teacher education programs on the one hand and the requirements to the professional competences of pre-service teachers set by the teacher professional standard and by the employers on the other hand. Thirdly, lack of the so-called multi-track system of receiving teacher training, which aims at attracting highly motivated students to work as teachers. And fourthly, lack of the well-targeted political strategy, which aims at raising a teacher's profile and motivating students to become teachers. One of the most prominent impulses for solving these problems became law on education, which significantly altered the main educational objectives, principles, and requirements in the country. Moreover, the process of teacher education modernization has been remarkably influenced by the professional standard for teachers adopted in 2013. It has provided uniform requirements for the contents and quality of professional pedagogical work, for the assessment of teacher qualifications necessary for employment, for the development of professional instructions, and for the development of federal state standards for teacher education. The next step was the comprehensive modernization project for teacher education that was implemented in 2014-2017. This project had two stages and included 33 sub-projects which aimed at modernizing all the main teacher education specialization. The implementation of the comprehensive modernization project involved 65 universities representing the majority of all Russian regions. The key objectives of the project define the main modernization trends. Developing the competence-based model of the modern teacher who is capable of meeting the requirements of the professional teacher standard, federal state educational standards for general education and the main challenges of the 21st century. Ensuring a multi-track system for entering the teaching profession. Also, organizing methodological practice-based learning for teacher education students. Designing educational programs on the basis of profession-oriented modules which prepare student teachers for solving professional problems. Emphasizing the practical component of teacher education through the active interaction with other educational organizations, the model of a skill-university partnership, and others. It is important to note that the shift towards the process of teacher education modernization took place at the backdrop of teacher shortages growing in Russian schools over the last 10-20 years. For instance, according to the official statistics for 2017, there were 21,000 vacant teacher positions, which is only around 1% from the total number of all Russian teachers. However, this figure doesn't indicate a hidden deficit, which is much more serious. The hidden deficit means that teachers work overtime, more than 18 academic lessons per week. The columns 2 and 3 in this table show that 1.4 million Russian teachers pulling the weight for 1.9 million teachers. This disproportion is growing in rural areas much more rapidly than in urban schools, as well as in some regions more than in others. The situation looks even more dismal when the age of teachers is taken into account. The official statistics shows that almost 25% of all teachers have already reached the age of retirement. Russian women retire at the age of 55. The situation is most extreme in rural areas and small towns. This tendency is growing despite special governmental measures aimed at attracting and educating new teachers. At the moment, approximately 5% of all university students are enrolled in teacher education programs. In 2019, the biggest number of state-funded first-year students was enrolled in teacher education programs in comparison to other professional specializations, 62,000 people. The best high school graduates were selected for state-funded places at these programs based on their final examinations results. In addition to that, around 50,000 teacher students are paying tuition fees. Nevertheless, teacher shortages keep growing. This situation has led to the diversification of the teacher education system in Russia. Specialized pedagogical universities, which prepared 90% of all teachers in the Soviet Union, had lost their monopoly in teacher education when non-pedagogical universities started offering teacher education programs. The increasing demand for teachers created new opportunities for educators. Many have already managed to get state funding for teacher education projects after seeing commercial interest in this domain. Along with that, a new initiative took place in 2010. Specialized pedagogical universities were merged with non-pedagogical universities. The main reason for this was the sad state of small regional pedagogical universities, which were struggling with the consequences of the demographic decline developing since the end of 1980s. Shrinking numbers of skilled graduates and university applicants meant that small pedagogical universities could not compete anymore for the best candidates. Almost all Russian pedagogical universities were challenged by such problems as the decline in the quality of student enrollment, especially evident across different majors. Consequently, certain universities were ranked as outsiders among other groups of universities in the country, according to the first monitoring survey on the student enrollment. Introduction of pedagogical modules in non-pedagogical universities, including private universities, happened at the same time as the universalization of pedagogical universities. This was preconditioned by the labor market demands, commercial interests, and other factors. These structural adjustments defined further diversification of the system of higher education in Russia. Thus, the term specialized pedagogical universities were substituted by the idea of higher education institutions that deliver teacher education through pedagogical programs. This way, higher education institutions can be further grouped into: firstly, specialized pedagogical universities and institutions; secondly, traditional non-pedagogical universities that deliver teacher education through pedagogical programs; thirdly, specialized universities that deliver teacher education through pedagogical programs; fourthly, federal, regional and other universities that were formed as a result of the merger of several universities, including pedagogical universities; and fifthly, private universities that deliver teacher education through certain pedagogical programs. Today, non-pedagogical universities prepare as many future teachers as pedagogical universities do. In 2017, teacher education modules were offered at 48 pedagogical universities, 226 non-pedagogical universities, among which 50 universities were not state-funded. The number of students at both types of the universities almost equaled 115,000 and 106,000 students, respectively. According to the today's statistics, teacher education has been top-ranked and prioritized at non-pedagogical, especially large federal universities. Pedagogical programs are run by different university units, which may be referred to as branches, faculties, institutes within a university, departments or schools. The number of universities without such organizational units, however, is still rather high. Teacher education in non-pedagogical universities is greatly influenced by the main research fields that the university prioritizes. the place of the teacher education domain within the university's hierarchy, and such subjective factor as outstanding personal and professional qualities of scholars. At the same time, teacher education units still experience subtle but intense pressure at some non-pedagogical universities, which causes problems. Such contemptuous disregard stems from an anachronistic stereotype of the teacher education field as having a low status, which might be the repercussion of outdated approaches used by the scholars from other research areas to evaluate the role of teacher education field within the university. In the 1990s, about 100 pedagogical universities prepared future teachers, whereas today, more than 270 universities, both pedagogical and non-pedagogical, offer teacher education programs. Given the lack of independent organizations for certification of pre-service teachers, the issue of providing equal opportunities to quality education became more prominent. Academic teaching staff at the universities where teacher education is not prioritized is reported to be low qualified. Besides, such universities lack professional organization for teachers, related environment and traditions. The universities of this kind are easily recognized judging from the number of students, future teachers studying there. For instance, less than 200 students are enrolled in one of about 80 such universities in Russia. At the same time, within the last few years, small pedagogical universities were merged with large non-pedagogical federal universities to form a completely new type of universities. The universities of a new type have a high share of teacher education programs. Besides, they received valuable financial benefits, excellent infrastructure and educational environment, highly qualified teaching staff, and modern management system as the resources of several universities were combined. The teacher education unit in such universities is commensurate with solely pedagogical universities in the quality of education. The universities of a new type are characterized by well-developed infrastructure and efficient educational services, as they incorporated non-pedagogical universities' up-to-date research laboratories in various scientific areas on the one hand, and pedagogical universities' substantial experience in teaching techniques and didactics. According to the experts, the most successful in this regard are Kazan Federal University, Southern Federal University, Vyatka State University, and some other universities. Some universities are in the constant search for new approaches to teacher education, and Kazan Federal University serves as an example. In 2011, KFU included 2 pedagogical universities in its structure. Having made teacher education as one of its priority areas, KFU embarked on the process of forming its own model, updating the content of teacher education programs. As a result, Kazan Federal University is one of the 3 largest teacher education centers in Russia. The university offers 42 bachelor's and 37 master's teacher education programs. Over 10,000 students with the teacher education major are studying at KFU. In addition, more than 10,000 in-service teachers annually complete professional development courses run by the university. The university has an up-to-date education infrastructure, including 2 grammar schools, centers for practical skills development, state-of-the-art laboratories, and a planetarium. The university is going to establish a nursery school for children with autism spectrum disorders. KFU is one of the few universities implementing programs in all 3 areas of higher education and all subject majors needed for modern schools. Today, more and more Russian scholars and experts are discussing the case of KFU with regard to the development of a new teacher education model. The characteristic features of this model involve a greater variety of educational trajectories, modern infrastructure, and a wide range of educational services. KFU implements traditional, distributed, and integrated models of teacher education. The KFU example is remarkable for its wide range of educational options, namely 7 trajectories. The resources of the multidisciplinary university made it possible to develop a good infrastructure for continuous teacher education ensured by annual state orders for teacher professional development. And it should be acknowledged that the new teacher education model does not conflict with the traditional one. On the contrary, it serves as complementary, offering a great variety of educational trajectories, which is extremely important for the Russian context. This is a response to criticism from proponents of pedagogy-oriented universities. It is also crucial that the research focus of the new universities as centers of interdisciplinary research is aimed at strengthening the study of current issues in the field of education. The transformational process of teacher education in Russia is in line with international trends in the area. The diversification of teacher education programs at various higher education organizations replaces the previous dominance of universities specializing solely in teacher education. On the one hand, this was caused by a teacher shortage in different regions of Russia and labor market demands. On the other hand, different types of universities offering teacher education courses strive to make a profit and are inevitably becoming more commercialized. It is important to note that some of these universities are unprepared to provide teacher education programs, which leads to the declining quality of education. Moreover, the majority of these universities view teacher education as of secondary importance. As a result, they pay less attention to the professionalism of educators, development of infrastructure, and equipment of laboratories. The lack of traditions and an improper understanding of the concept of teacher education also contribute to the problem. In the light of this, there is a contradiction between quantitative and qualitative criteria. Recently, several non-pedagogical universities have formed large university complexes, and as a result, they offer high-quality teacher education programs. They embody the new concept of a modern university, which has been created in the process of large-scale university merging. Kazan Federal University is one of the most remarkable cases because it was created as a result of several universities merging, including 2 pedagogical universities. This synergetic effect facilitated the development of the new model of continuing professional learning and development for teachers. To summarize, teacher shortage can be reduced in due course by the universities of a new type. They have the potential to create and offer various professional development opportunities, pedagogical internships, individualized tutoring, and online materials, and thus facilitate different routes into the teaching profession for non-teaching graduates. From this perspective, the new routes into teaching need to be officially recognized and regulated within the scope of the national educational policy. Thank you for your attention.